Here's a poem for you by the American poet Gary Snyder. It's called Mid-August at Sourdough Mountain Lookout. Down valley a smoke haze, 3 days heat after 5 days rain. Pitch glows on the fir cones, across rocks and meadows swarms of new flies. I cannot remember things I once read, a few friends, but they are in cities. Drinking cold snow water from a tin cup, looking down for miles through high, still air. Hello, and welcome to the Crane Bag Podcast. I am Jay Leeming. What is in that crane bag? It's a bag made from the skin of a crane, or a heron, or an egret. And what's in that bag? Well, there's stories in that bag for sure. There is myth of all kinds. The bag itself, the image of the bag, comes from Irish mythology, where there was a magical bag owned by Finn McCool and owned by many others before him, which included many magical implements, tools of all kinds, fantastic helmet, a special bag inside the bag, weapons, all kinds of things you might need. And at high tide, you could see everything in the bag. At low tide, they all became invisible. So it's a mysterious thing. And perhaps this podcast may aspire to be such a mysterious thing. I don't even know what is in it, but I do know today we are going to pay some attention. Today we are going to pay some attention, yes we are, to this moment, to this hour, to this breath, and to the work of the American poet Gary Snyder. Thank you for joining me. Let us begin. Let me give you that poem a second time. Poems are reusable. They are news which stays news, in the words of Ezra Pound. And so, let's hear it again. The title is Mid-August at Sourdough Mountain Lookout. So Snyder was working as a fire lookout in the Sierra Nevada, and he was high up on a mountain for a long period of time. And this is one of the poems he wrote. Down valley a smoke haze, 3 days heat after 5 days rain. Pitch glows on the fir cones, across rocks and meadows swarms of new flies. I cannot remember things I once read, a few friends, but they are in cities. Drinking cold snow water from a tin cup, looking down for miles through high, still air. So what's going on with this poem, huh? Wow, I mean, it's cool. I love being up there in the high, still air. Fantastic, huh? But I hear it at the beginning, and immediately the language is clipped, down valley a smoke haze. And part of me, I have to be honest, part of me is like, come on, man, can't you just say it normally? Which I guess is something we might frequently say to poets, but down valley a smoke haze. I mean, couldn't he say, down in the valley, there's a haze of smoke? Well, he could, but that would be boring, right? Down valley a smoke haze, 3 days heat after 5 days rain. What does he accomplish by clipping the language in that way? Well, he focuses on the nouns, valley, smoke, haze. It's 5 words in the first line, and 3 of them are nouns. Second line, same thing, 3 days heat after 5 days rain. And if I were to change it like I imagined doing and were to say, down in the valley there is a smoke haze, or even worse, if I were to say, down in the valley I see a smoke haze, what is added? Well, connecting words are added. Also in the latter example, myself is added. Someone seeing it, I see a smoke haze. And none of that is here. He's clipped it down. It's like he's trying to make it so you are there, just essentially confronting the things. Pitch glows on the fir cones. Now that is pitch, sap, basically, on the cones of fir trees. I guess that's pretty clear. But it's glowing, I imagine, in the light, I assume. Across rocks and meadows, swarms of new flies. Listen to the spondees in this stanza, right? A spondee, what's that? Well, it's when there's two accented syllables beside each other in the English language. We use it all the time. It's one of the 1,000 delicious things you can do with the English language. First aid is a spondee. Also, cold snap. Oh, the weather's bad. We're in the midst of a cold snap. Also, if you live on the East Coast, the Mass Pike, the highway from Boston, mid-New York State to Boston, the Mass Pike. We don't say the Mass Highway. I mean, we could. We don't say the Massachusetts Turnpike. It takes too much time. But it's not just the time we're interested in. It's not just in being, efficient and getting to the end of the sentence as fast as possible. It's about the sound. And of course, this sound in English has an ancestry, and it goes all the way back. It goes all the way back to what we first define as English, which would be Old English, otherwise known as Anglo-Saxon, which was the language in which poems like Beowulf were written, which goes like this. What way gardena, on yard dagum, theod kinninga, thrim gefrunon, hutha ethelingas elin fremedon, oft shield chafing, shathena threatum, ba, 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 ba. There's lots of that emphasis there. So it's a poetic line built on 4 beats, 2 strong ones and then a break, a caesura, as we would say, and then 2 more. It's a sort of a pounding rhythm. It's very different from anything you would find in Greek or Latin or Italian, present-day Italian. And what English is a mashup of these 2 forces of the Anglo-Saxon sort of, I want to say, groundedness of that, dun, dun, and then this more flowing music, which comes from Latin and Greek. And isn't it interesting that in this poem, which, as we shall see, is greatly influenced by Asian sources and Asian ways of thought, we are in fact returning to the roots of our own culture, in the English language. And the question is this poem an escape or a return? What I feel in this poem is a desire to be in touch with elemental things. And in our own lives, in his life, as it is expressed in this poem, that means leaving the cities behind and going to the wilderness. It also means meditating, not hanging on to your thoughts, but to sit where you are, breathe in and breathe out. Sit where you are and breathe in and breathe out. And so it's entirely fitting that he should, perhaps even unconsciously, be returning to the roots of his own language, of our own language, in the Anglo-Saxon rhythms of the poetry in which our language began. So, down valley, a smoke haze. So smoke haze is a spondee. And then we've got, I guess there's probably is a word for it, but we've got 3 in a row, right? 3 days heat after 5 days rain. Pitch glows on the fir cones. Across rocks and meadows, swarms of new flies. Do you hear how across rocks and meadows gives us a little break from that rhythm, Down valley, a smoke haze. 3 days heat after 5 days rain. Pitch glows on the fir cones. Across rocks and meadows, swarms of new flies. Da-da-da-da-da-da, yeah? Hear that rhythm. So he's paring things down and confronting us with the things exactly there. And then he enters the poem. I cannot remember things I once read. A few friends, but they are in cities. Drinking cold snow water from a tin cup, looking down for miles through high, still air. Again, we have those 3 blows right there. High, still air. A few friends, but they are in cities. It's kind of an arrogant thing, maybe it strikes me to say. It's like they're dead or something. It's like, oh, they're in cities. Forget it. This is the real, right? Which brings us to his whole project, his whole being and his way of being in the world, which is quite amazing. Gary Snyder was born in 1930 and is still with us, and studied in Japan in the late 50s, studied in a Zen monastery, studied Zen there, and sat in meditation there often. And so was profoundly influenced by Zen spirituality and culture and the Zen way of doing things. He brought that back to the U.S. In the form of his own poems, in the form of his, in many ways, his groundedness in an era, the 60s and subsequently the 70s, in times which were very chaotic in some ways, in many ways. He was a very grounded presence. I tell stories. I tell myths and legends from all over. I like the long voyage, I like let's go far to the end of the world and come back. I love it. I love it. But that's not what Snyder is about. Or if he's about that, it's as if we're at the end of that voyage. We've come back and here we are. The Zen teacher D.T. Suzuki was once asked about enlightenment. And the question, I believe, was something like, well, if enlightenment is inevitable for all things, if all things have within them a spark of Buddha nature, as we might say, and will eventually become enlightened, the stones, the rocks, you, me, all of us, why are we not there now? Which is a good question. And D.T. Suzuki responded. He picked up a spoon and he said, this spoon has Buddha nature. This spoon is now in paradise. So I find that pretty wonderful. And I find wonderful not just what he says, but how he says it, and how the two are combined. What and how are the same. Means and end are completely united. They are the same thing. He picks up that spoon. This spoon is now in paradise. This spoon is now in paradise. Well, that's the story. So, Gary Snyder, though he did voyage across the sea, though he did travel a fair amount for sure, nevertheless has an incredible groundedness and a ability to see the value in just the right here where you are. And, of course, he is nourished and supported in that by centuries of tradition, both in the world of Zen and also in the world of poetry, in particular the poetry of Tang Dynasty China. So that's the 9th century CE, as we would say now. Here's one for you. It's by the poet Du Fu. It's from the book 100 Poems from the Chinese, all translated by Kenneth Rexroth. And this poem is called Overlooking the Desert. Clear autumn, I gaze out into endless spaces. The horizon wavers in bands of haze. Far off, the river flows into the sky. The lone city is blurred with smoke. The wind blows the last leaves away. The hills grow dim as the sun sets. A single crane flies late to roost. The twilit trees are full of crows. That's the poem, now translated from Chinese. And my reaction to this poem, well, I think it's lovely, of course. But about halfway through, maybe 2/3, I start to be like, well, wait, what else is going to happen? Are we just going to look at stuff? Isn't this building up to something, like a statement about, whatever, I feel lonely or something? And the answer is no. The answer is the things themselves are the statement. Perception is expression. Perception is expression. So what you see is not necessarily, it's the world, but how you see it and what you see, that expresses who you are. Someone else could have been in that moment, overlooking the desert, and would have written an entirely different poem, confronted with those same objects, confronted with that same view. Here's that poem for you again. Overlooking the desert. Clear autumn, I gaze out into endless spaces. The horizon wavers in bands of haze. Far off the river flows into the sky. The lone city is blurred with smoke. The wind blows the last leaves away. The hills grow dim as the sun sets. A single crane flies late to roost. The twilit trees are full of crows. 9 lines of poetry, and he uses the word I only once. He refers to himself only once. And again, thinking about perception and expression, we in the West, so-called West, tend to think that we express stuff and the world is our backdrop. It's like a play, and there's a character saying things, moving around, making toast, whatever they're doing, and then there's the background, which is the world. In a poem like this, the world is not background. You are of it. The poet is part of it, and the world is in him or her. So it's not like we perceive the world and describe it. It's like we are there. We are one of the things in the world. And the two together are a single expression. And it is not a question of subject and object. It's not a question of either of those things. It's something beyond. It's just a flowing in which all things are luminous with their own presence. Here is one more poem like that for you. This is from Kenneth Rexroth's second collection. Just so you know, Rexroth is spelled Rexroth. This book is 100 more poems from the Chinese, Love and the Turning Year. And this is a New Directions book. And it was first published in 1970. Look at that. So this is Night at Anchor by Maple Bridge by Chang Chi. The moon sets, a crow caws. Frost fills the sky. Maple leaves fall on the river. The fishermen's fires keep me awake. From beyond Su Chu, the midnight bell on Cold Mountain reaches as far as my little boat. So he's just saying what is there, but he finds in that a whole world and expresses a great deal through those things which are there. And this is, of course, a translation. I do not speak Chinese by any stretch, but I am told that in the original, it is very much, you fill in the pronouns, you fill in the connecting words. Those are all assumed in Chinese. That's what I've been told. So basically what you're looking at is just really, I want to say blocks of language, boat, crane, crow, moon, and the speaker and a lot of other things are implied. So that way of constructing a poem, that way of seeing the world has greatly influenced Gary Snyder, and I think we can see it in this poem of his. Another thing we see is the way in which the title of the poem does a lot of work. Over and over again, the titles of the poems in Chinese that we see from the Tang Dynasty are the titles explain like exactly where we are and what's happening. Winter Dawn, Snowstorm, Country Cottage. None of these is like, let's say, Final Soliloquy of the Interior Paramour. That's a Wallace Stevens title. No, we're not doing that. We're doing Autumn Evening Beside the Lake. We're doing The Southern Room Over the River. So those titles tell us exactly where we are, and there's a sense that once that's done, the poet doesn't need to worry about those details and can just see what's around and say what is there. And there is the sense in these poems that that is all you need. Just say what is there. Everything has Buddha nature. If that's true, if everything has a spark of the divine in it, you can just say, winter wind, snow on my neighbor's house, the electric line going up and down in the breeze, which is basically what's outside my window right now. You can just say that, and you have access to the divine in things without having to go a great distance, without having to imagine huge towers of, gods and goddesses or other worlds, whatever. So Snyder returned to the U.S., made a home for himself in the Sierra Nevada. And I should say my understanding of this poem comes also from the time I have spent in the Sierra Nevada. I lived there for 5 years in the summer with my wife. We both worked as ranger naturalists. She had done this for 10 years prior to this, and I was the lucky one. I sort of married into this experience. So we would go up there and spend 4 months of every year living at high elevation, living at 9,000 feet up in the Sierra Nevada, which was a fantastic and rigorous experience. And I read this poem and I'm reminded of that. I remember those days and the environment up there, which I will try to convey to you. It's high up, right? It's cold at night, like 40 degrees, which, is cold for July. And in the days, it can get quite hot, 70, 80 degrees. The air is dry. It does not hold heat for that long. So as soon as that sun goes down, it's like, whoa, it's like autumn. It feels like autumn. And also during the day, like if you step into the shade, it's like, whoa, it's October here. And over there in the sun, it's July. We lived up there in a little cabin, and I, worked as a ranger. I did like astronomy and geology and stuff like that. And we were surrounded by granite rocks everywhere, which, as rocks go, are on the youngish side. 65 million years, I believe, is the date on the granite up there. And but it's very tough stuff. It takes a long time for granite to get worn down. It's basically the heart of a volcano, which is chunks of it just lying all over the place. And the lodgepole pines up there, and the red fir, all the trees, fantastic. And this bright sun, a cloudless sky, often, just no clouds at all. And I would walk those trails, and I would see granite all around me. When I was up there, I felt like everything shallow and inconsequential was burned away. Not necessarily from me in my life, but, for example, we would take a train there. It would take 3 days from upstate New York and get to Yosemite. One time I had a copy of the New Yorker magazine with me, which is a magazine I admire and enjoy. But up there in the mountains, I remember looking at that thing, and I was just like, man, this is just burned to shreds up here, A restaurant review for some place on the Upper West Side? Like, what the hell? I don't care. A watch advertisement? A movie? Come on. We were up there with stone and air. And at night, I would look up at the stars, which were just fantastically bright. And I'd talk to visitors about these stars, which were millions of light years away. And I'd talk about the rocks by day, which had been made in a volcano, like I said, 60 million years ago or so. And we were in touch with elemental forces, it felt. I was. And so, as far as reading goes, well, I read the Upanishads, I read the Odyssey. You needed something like that to really stand up to that. The force of that. It was like there was a scouring wind over everything, just weeding out whatever you thought was important and getting you down to first things. I describe that not simply to tell you about my life, but to say that I think it's a quality of the place. And Snyder found it there as well. I mean, of course, he was raised in the Pacific Northwest, so, I think he was early on connecting with the wilderness in that way. And seeing it as a place of elemental things. And so he sought that out in poetry, and he sought that out in his life. And he worked on trail crews in Yosemite. So I would walk these trails, many of which were trails he could have helped build. And, you might be thinking, well, why do you need to build a trail? Like, can't you just, walk through the woods? And, of course, you have to remember this is an extremely mountainous environment. So building trails, wow, it's like building stairs in some places. Building stairs using granite stones. And some of them are fantastically wonderful and beautiful, really. May Lake, climbing up to Mount Hoffman there. That ascent up the side of that mountain. There are places where it is like a staircase, that people have laid down. He's got another poem, Rip Rap, all about that in particular, about trail work. In fact, I guess I should say, there was one time in the campground, as I was making my rounds with a hat on and uniform, all that stuff, I met a guy, an elderly fellow, who actually had been on the trail crew with Snyder years before. And he told me that when they were building those trails, they had used poems to guide them, poems that were rhyming poems from Peru, which had been used there to record and keep safe the knowledge of how to build a trail through the mountains for, a long, long time. I've really got no way of corroborating that, but that's what he told me, and it was fascinating. I've tried to poke around. I haven't found anything about it. I'm just saying that because it's coming up, and it needs to go somewhere so nobody forgets. So in this poem, there is the awareness of the sacred nature of all things, yes, but also the awareness that for humans to find that, sometimes it's good to get away from it all. Sometimes it's good to go to the mountains, to get away from those magazines and those websites, and to really confront things as they are. Now, of course, can you do that in the city? Can you do that in a gate of an airport? Well, possibly so. But it takes a serious effort, an effort which, well, for us anyway, it requires a serious effort which we may not be up to as yet. So Snyder in his life has sought out those places, and in his poetry as well. And I have to say that over the long haul, if I'm reading like a lot of Gary Snyder's poems, I do start to hunger for something else. I do hunger for some of the other delights of poetry, which he doesn't always provide. Something richer, more bounteous, perhaps, more generous. It's not just visions of other worlds, but just, I don't know, perhaps something a little more sensuous would be one thing I would seek. But that's me, and we all have our preferences. And he is coming from an entirely different place, clearly. What I love about his work is the way it invites us to connect with trees and dirt and stone. The way it invites us to be fully here, present to the earth beneath our feet and the sky above us and around us. We think so often that we're going to get somewhere else, that that's going to finally be it, that we're going to go somewhere and get to where we're meant to get to. But his work tells us that the place we most need to get to is right here. Or, as the Japanese poet Matsuo Basho wrote, the journey is the destination. Thank you for listening to this podcast. There is an archive of all episodes of this podcast on my website, which is jayleeming.com. That's JAYLEEMING.com. In that archive, there are many episodes devoted to poetry, as well as quite a lot of stories, myths, and stories from around the world. If you're able to support this podcast, please do so. You can do that at patreon.com/storyjl. Thanks for listening, and take care.